Before you scroll, before you tell yourself this is just another money video, let me ask you something honestly. Have you ever noticed how life feels completely different when you finally cross a certain number in your bank account? Not rich, not free forever, just different. Today, we're talking about what really changes after $20,000. Not the fake motivation, not the Instagram fantasy, the real psychological shift, the silent doors that open, and the uncomfortable truths nobody warns you about. If you stay until the end, you'll understand why this number changes people more than six figures ever did for some. When most Americans hear $20,000, they don't think wealth. They think emergency fund, credit card payoff, or maybe a small cushion. But here's the part nobody explains. The first $20,000 doesn't change what you can buy. It changes how you think. Before that number, money controls your decisions. After that number, you start controlling money, even if just a little. And that little changes everything. Before $20,000, every bill feels personal. A car repair feels like an attack. A medical expense feels like panic. You don't just budget, you survive. Your brain is constantly calculating risk, constantly asking, what if something goes wrong? You might smile, joke, and keep going, but mentally, you're always one problem away from stress. That state rewires how you think, how you work, and how you see opportunity. You don't take risks because you can't afford mistakes. You don't think long-term because the short-term is screaming too loud. Then, one day, slowly or suddenly, you look at your account and see it, 20,000. And nothing magical happens on the outside. You still drive the same car, you still go to the same job, you still wake up with responsibilities. But inside, something shifts. The noise lowers. The panic isn't gone, but it's quieter. You realize that one unexpected bill won't destroy you. One bad month won't end your story. And that realization is powerful in a way money itself can't measure. After 20,000, your relationship with time changes. Before, time is your enemy. Every hour not working feels dangerous. Rest feels guilty. Vacations feel irresponsible. You trade time for money because you have no buffer. But once you have that cushion, even a small one, time becomes a tool instead of a threat. You start thinking, what if I learned a new skill instead of I can't afford to stop? You start asking better questions, not because you're smarter, but because your brain finally has space. This is where many people get it wrong. They think money brings confidence. It doesn't. Safety brings confidence. And $20,000 is often the first time many Americans feel real financial safety, even temporarily. That safety changes how you speak in meetings. You're less afraid to say no, less afraid to walk away, less desperate to please. Employers can feel that. Clients can feel that. People treat you differently when you stop operating from fear, even if they don't know why. Another thing that changes is how you see spending. Before, every purchase feels emotional. You either avoid spending completely or spend impulsively to escape stress. After 20,000, you start separating wants from survival. You don't feel the same rush buying things, because buying things was never the real problem. The real problem was insecurity. When that eases, consumption loses its grip. You start asking, is this worth it, instead of, can I afford it right now? But here's the uncomfortable truth nobody talks about. After 20,000, you also start noticing how fragile it all still is. You realize how fast it could disappear if you're careless. That awareness creates a new kind of anxiety, but a healthier one. Not panic, but responsibility. You stop fantasizing about quitting everything overnight. You start thinking in systems. You start protecting what you've built. This is where people either level up or fall back. Your circle changes too, sometimes quietly. You stop bonding over shared struggle and start bonding over shared direction. Some conversations feel repetitive now. Some habits feel heavy. You're not better than anyone, but you're moving differently, and that can feel lonely. Many people self-sabotage at this stage just to feel familiar again. They overspend, they treat themselves into zero, because safety can feel boring when you're addicted to chaos. After 20,000, opportunity finally becomes visible, not because opportunities suddenly appear, but because you can now afford to notice them. You can afford to wait. You can afford to say, let me think about it. You can afford to invest small amounts of money or time without immediate return. That's something broke people are rarely allowed to do, and it's not their fault. Survival mode blocks vision. This is also when mindset cliches start to make sense. Things like delayed gratification, long-term thinking, and compounding stop sounding like advice and start sounding like logic. Before, they felt insulting. After, they feel obvious. That's not growth of character, it's relief of pressure. And relief changes behavior faster than motivation ever could. But don't misunderstand this. $20,000 doesn't make you free. It gives you a glimpse of freedom, enough to realize how trapped you were before and how intentional you must be going forward. Many people lose this money because they mistake relief for victory. They relax too much. They forget how hard it was to get there. They return to old patterns because the pain faded. The people who truly change after 20,000 don't celebrate louder. They move quieter. They stop announcing plans. They start building boring systems, automatic savings, emergency funds, skills stacking, side income. They become less flashy and more focused because they finally understand something most never get taught. Real wealth starts with stability, not luxury. If you're under 20,000 right now, this isn't meant to discourage you. It's meant to explain why the grind feels heavier than it should. And if you're around that number or just past it, this is your warning. This is the most important stage, more important than your first 6 figures, because this is where habits either solidify or collapse. In the next part, we'll talk about why people with less than 20,000 chase fast money, why people just above it start playing defense, and how understanding this shift can completely change the way you approach work, risk, and freedom in America today. Once you cross that $20,000 line, something subtle but dangerous happens. You stop chasing money the same way. Before, speed mattered more than direction. Overtime, side hustles, flipping things quickly, grabbing anything that paid now. Fast money felt like oxygen. After 20,000, speed starts to feel risky. You've seen how hard it was to build that cushion, and suddenly protecting it feels just as important as growing it. This is where many Americans slow down, not because they're lazy, but because loss now has weight. People below that number often take extreme risks without realizing it. High-interest debt, paycheck advances, gambling on business ideas with no runway, working themselves into burnout. It's not recklessness, it's pressure. When your back is against the wall, you don't play chess, you swing. But once you have something to lose, your brain switches modes. You start thinking defensively. You read contracts more carefully. You hesitate before jumping into opportunities that sound too good to be true. You don't need every dollar anymore, and that changes your posture. This is also where patience enters the picture. Before, waiting felt impossible. You needed results now because now was the problem. After 20,000, waiting becomes tolerable. You can let money sit. You can let investments breathe. You can let skills compound. This patience is invisible to outsiders, but it's the foundation of every long-term success story. The irony is that patience looks like privilege, but it's often just the absence of panic. Another shift happens in how you view work. Before, work is survival. You endure it, you tolerate it, you tell yourself someday it'll be different. After 20,000, work becomes leverage. You start asking better questions. Is this job teaching me something valuable? Is it scalable? Does it lead anywhere or just keep me busy? You're no longer impressed by hustle alone. You start valuing alignment. That's dangerous for employers who rely on desperation and powerful for workers who finally have options. This is also when comparison starts to hit differently. Before, you compared yourself upward and felt behind. Now, you compare downward and feel scared of falling back. You realize how thin the line really is, how one bad decision, one lifestyle upgrade too early, one emergency without insurance can erase years of progress. This awareness can either make you paranoid or disciplined. The disciplined ones quietly separate themselves from the noise. Lifestyle inflation becomes the real enemy here, not because it's evil, but because it's seductive. A better apartment, a nicer car, more eating out, it all feels justified because you worked hard, and you did. But this is the moment where many people lock themselves into higher expenses that kill flexibility. They don't fall back to zero, but they get stuck, comfortable but trapped, earning enough to survive, not enough to move. The people who grow past this stage learn to delay upgrades until income, not savings, supports them. You also start seeing money emotionally instead of urgently. Before, money solved fear. After, money solves choice. That's a huge difference. Choice means saying no to toxic environments. Choice means walking away from deals that don't feel right. Choice means investing in health, learning, and time instead of just things. This is where money begins to serve you instead of command you, but only if you let it. There's another uncomfortable truth. After 20,000, excuses start disappearing. Before, it was easy to blame circumstances, low pay, high rent, bad luck, and many of those reasons were real. But now, progress depends more on behavior than environment. And that's scary, because if you don't grow from here, you can't blame being broke anymore. This is where self-honesty becomes unavoidable. You begin to notice how most financial advice isn't designed for this stage. Advice for broke people focuses on survival. Advice for rich people focuses on optimization. But this middle zone, the transition zone, is quiet and confusing. There are fewer voices, fewer role models. You're not struggling enough to relate to poverty stories and not wealthy enough to relate to investment flex culture. You're in between, and in between is where discipline matters most. This is also when long-term thinking stops being abstract. Retirement, insurance, taxes, diversification, boring topics suddenly feel relevant, not exciting, but important. You stop laughing at stability. You stop mocking playing it safe. You realize that safety is what allowed growth in the first place. The goal isn't to avoid risk forever. It's to choose risk intentionally, with buffers. Another change is how you treat failure. Before, failure was catastrophic. One mistake could set you back months or years. After 20,000, failure becomes data. Painful, yes, but survivable. And survivable failure is the fastest teacher there is. This is why people with small cushions often outperform those with nothing. They can afford to experiment without destroying themselves. But let's be clear. $20,000 doesn't protect you from stupidity. It just gives stupidity consequences instead of collapse. You can still lose it all. You can still make emotional decisions. You can still chase validation. The difference is, now you're choosing those outcomes, not being forced into them. And choice is responsibility. Many Americans never cross this threshold, not because they're incapable, but because the system makes it hard to pause long enough to build momentum. Rent rises faster than wages, debt fills the gaps, emergencies reset progress. That's why reaching this number feels like oxygen, not abundance, but breathing room. If you're here now, the most important thing you can do is protect your thinking. Don't rush to look rich. Don't announce progress too loudly. Don't let comfort erase hunger. This is the stage where consistency beats intensity, where boring wins, where quiet discipline builds loud futures. In the next part, we'll talk about how people who understand this stage use 20,000 as a launch pad instead of a finish line. how they structure their money, their habits, and their identity so they never have to start from zero again, even if life hits hard. Once people understand that $20,000 is not a destination but a threshold, their behavior starts to split into two very different paths. One group treats it like proof that they made it, proof that they're finally good with money. They relax, reward themselves, and slowly drift back toward the same patterns that kept them stuck before. The other group treats it like a foundation, something fragile, something to protect, something to build on quietly. The gap between these two groups doesn't show immediately, but over time it becomes massive. The people who use 20,000 as a launch pad start thinking in layers, not just how much they have, but where it lives, how fast it moves, and what job each dollar has. Emergency money stays boring and untouched. Growth money gets separated. Spending money gets limited on purpose. This separation isn't about being strict, it's about clarity. When everything is in one pile, emotions control decisions. When money has roles, logic steps in. Another major shift happens in identity. Before this stage, many Americans see themselves as bad with money or not a money person. Reaching 20,000 quietly challenges that story. You didn't get lucky for that long. You built something. And once that identity cracks, new behavior becomes possible. You start seeing yourself as someone who can learn, adapt, and improve financially. That identity shift is more powerful than any budget. This is also when people begin to understand the difference between income and wealth. Before, income felt like the goal. More hours, more paychecks, more grind. After 20,000, income becomes fuel, not the finish line. You start asking how stable it is, how predictable it is, and how dependent it is on your time. That's when side income stops being about quick cash and starts being about resilience. People who move forward from this stage often simplify instead of complicating. Fewer subscriptions, fewer impulse purchases, fewer financial commitments that lock them in. Simplicity creates flexibility, and flexibility creates power. Not the flashy kind, but the kind that lets you sleep at night and think clearly in the morning. You also start noticing how emotional most financial decisions really are. Not just yours, but everyone's. Friends upgrading lifestyles they can't afford, coworkers panicking over market dips, family members stuck in cycles of borrowing and repaying. With a small cushion, you gain perspective. You're not immune to emotion, but you can step back from it. And that distance helps you make better decisions, even when others are losing their heads. At this stage, learning accelerates. Not because information suddenly changes, but because relevance does. Articles about investing, credit optimization, taxes, and long-term planning stop feeling theoretical. They apply to you now. You read differently. You listen differently. You filter advice instead of absorbing everything. You realize that not all growth is aggressive, and not all caution is fear-based. This is also where people who succeed long-term begin to automate discipline. They don't rely on willpower. Savings happens automatically. Bills are predictable. Investing is scheduled. Automation removes emotion from routine decisions, freeing mental energy for bigger choices. The goal isn't perfection, it's consistency. And consistency compounds quietly. Another important change is how you define success. Before, success was escape, getting out of debt, getting out of stress, getting out of survival. After 20,000, success becomes sustainability, staying out, not having to rebuild from zero again, being able to handle life without financial collapse. This shift sounds boring, but it's what separates people who rise steadily from those who repeat cycles. You also become more selective with risk, not risk-averse, but risk-aware. You stop betting everything on one move. You test ideas smaller. You keep backup plans. You respect probability instead of ignoring it. This mindset doesn't slow progress, It protects it. And protection is what allows long-term growth in an unpredictable economy. There's a quiet confidence that comes from this stage. Not arrogance, not flexing, but calm. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to chase validation through spending. You know how fast things can change, so you move with intention. That calm shows up in conversations, negotiations, and decisions. People trust calm. Opportunities follow it. But this stage also requires restraint. The temptation to finally enjoy life can be strong, and enjoying life is important. The danger is turning enjoyment into escape. The people who keep growing allow joy without abandoning structure. They celebrate without sabotaging. They understand that balance isn't spending freely, it's spending consciously. $20,000 also teaches humility. You realize how much of financial progress is timing, health, opportunity, and support. You stop judging others as harshly. You understand that many people aren't lazy or stupid. They're trapped by circumstances you were lucky enough to avoid or escape. This awareness doesn't weaken ambition, it grounds it. At this point, the future starts to feel real. Not guaranteed, not easy, but possible. You can imagine 5 years ahead without immediate dread. You can plan without lying to yourself. And that mental shift alone changes daily behavior. You take better care of your body. You protect your energy. You think before reacting. This is why $20,000 changes more than people expect, not because of what it buys, but because of what it unlocks internally. It's not wealth, it's leverage over your own life. And once you taste that leverage, going back to chaos becomes much harder to tolerate. In the final part, we'll talk about what happens if you lose this money after learning these lessons, why many people bounce back faster the second time, and how understanding the psychology of this stage can protect you even when the numbers disappear. Losing $20,000 after you've crossed that threshold feels very different than never having it at all. Before you reach that level, loss feels like proof that you're doomed to stay stuck. After you've been there, loss feels painful, humbling, but not final. And that difference is everything. Because once your mindset has changed, money becomes something you can rebuild, not something you depend on for identity or hope. People who have crossed this stage and then fallen back often recover faster than they expect, not because the system suddenly becomes easier, but because they now understand what actually mattered. They know how to slow spending before panic hits. They know which habits created momentum and which ones drained it. They know the feeling of stability, and they know it wasn't magic, it was structure. That knowledge stays even when the balance drops. This is why many self-made people say their first money mattered more than their biggest money. The first time you prove to yourself that you can build a cushion, your brain rewires. You stop seeing money as random. You stop seeing yourself as powerless. Even if life knocks you down, you no longer start from ignorance. You start from experience, and experience compounds faster than cash. After this stage, you also stop fearing financial conversations. You ask questions, you negotiate, you plan, you talk about money without shame. Before, money felt emotional and personal. Now it feels strategic. That doesn't mean you become cold or greedy. It means you become intentional. You stop letting silence make decisions for you. Another powerful shift is how you handle uncertainty. Before $20,000, uncertainty feels like danger. After, it feels like a variable. You still respect it, but it no longer paralyzes you. This is critical in modern America, where careers are unstable, markets fluctuate, and nothing feels guaranteed. The ability to adapt mentally is more valuable than any single paycheck. You also begin to understand that true financial freedom isn't a number, it's a range where you can breathe, adjust, and respond without panic. $20,000 often marks the entry point into that range, not the end, but the beginning. It's where survival ends and strategy begins. This is why chasing six figures too early often backfires. Without the discipline and mindset built at lower levels, higher income just magnifies bad habits. People earn more and still feel broke. They upgrade everything except their thinking. 20,000 teaches restraint, patience, and respect for money in a way large incomes sometimes never do. For Americans navigating high costs, debt, and constant pressure, this stage matters more than flashy milestones. It's where you learn to live below your means without feeling deprived. It's where you learn to save without fear. It's where you learn to invest without desperation. These skills don't disappear when numbers change. If you're below this level right now, understand this. Your stress is not a personal failure. It's a predictable response to instability. Focus on building breathing room, not perfection. Small wins matter, consistency matters, and the mindset shift will come naturally once pressure eases. If you're around this level or above it, protect it. Not just the money, but the habits and thinking that got you there. Don't rush to impress. Don't confuse relief with arrival. Use this stage to build systems that survive bad months, bad years, and bad luck. And if you've been here before and lost it, don't carry shame, carry lessons. Most people never even reach this stage once. Reaching it means you're capable. Reaching it again means you're dangerous in the best way. Everything really does change after $20,000, not because life becomes easy, but because your mind becomes steadier. You stop reacting and start choosing. You stop fearing and start planning. And in a world that profits from keeping people anxious and impulsive, that shift is a quiet form of power. That's why this number matters, not for flexing, not for status, but because it's the moment you realize you're no longer just surviving, you're building.